They say old age earns you respect. That wisdom comes with gray hair, that the family will sit at your feet and hang on your every word. Well, I'm here to tell you, that's a lie, at least in my house. My name's Harold. I'm 74 years old, retired, widowed, and according to my children, the family clown. Not because I try to be funny, but because they think everything I say is outdated, ridiculous, or worth a good laugh at my expense. And it wasn't always this way. Once upon a time, I was the provider, the man who worked 2 jobs so my kids could go to college, the man who paid for every wedding, every emergency, every dream. But somewhere along the line, the man they once admired became the man they mock. Started small. Snickers when I mixed up an app's name, chuckles when I needed help with my phone. But then it grew darker, into a running family joke. At Sunday dinners, I was no longer dad or grandpa. I was the punchline. And maybe, just maybe, I let it slide too long. But you see, life has a way of giving even the most underestimated man a chance to turn the tables. And the night I finally snapped, the night I went from being the family joke to the family lesson, changed everything. So buckle up, because you're about to hear a story of revenge, redemption, and respect. And trust me, you'll want to stick around until the end. And hey, before we dive in, do me a favor. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been laughed at by the very people you sacrificed for, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this, they deserve to be told. Now, let's begin. I should have known the tide had turned the day my son Greg rolled his eyes at me during dinner. It was a Sunday, like always. My daughter Linda had brought her 2 teenagers over. Greg came with his wife, Melanie. And of course, my youngest, Tim, had already claimed his spot at the far end of the table, scrolling on his phone. I had spent all afternoon making roast chicken, the way my late wife used to. I still remember her recipe by heart. The smell filled the house, warm and comforting, like it always had. But as soon as we sat down, I knew something was off. "Dad," Greg said, stabbing a piece of chicken, "you didn't burn it this time." Progress. Everyone chuckled. Even the grandkids snickered. I smiled, tried to brush it off. "Well, practice makes perfect," I said, but my voice was thinner than I wanted. Then Linda chimed in. "Remember when Dad tried to use Siri to set an alarm and ended up calling 911? Classic." The table erupted with laughter. My hands tightened around my fork. That incident had embarrassed me. Sure, but I never thought it would become a permanent joke. Tim, without looking up from his phone, added, "Grandpa's basically the reason tech support still exists." More laughter. I tried to laugh along, tried to keep the peace. That's what I always did. But inside, a knot was forming, a mix of shame, anger, and something deeper, betrayal. You see, when my wife was alive, no one dared disrespect me at the table. She had a way of commanding the room, of reminding the kids what I'd sacrificed. But now, I was alone, an easy target, and they knew it. The conversation moved on, but I barely heard it. I just watched them, the children I'd raised, the grandchildren I'd spoiled, treat me like a relic, like I wasn't a man who had bled, sweated, and worked my fingers raw to give them the lives they enjoyed. At that table, I wasn't Harold, the father. I was Harold, the family joke. And the worst part, they didn't even realize it was hurting me. They thought I was smiling along. They thought I was used to it. But let me tell you something. There's only so many times a man can swallow his pride before it chokes him. That night, after they left, I sat alone at that same table, staring at the empty plates. The chicken had gone cold. The laughter still echoed in my ears. And that's when I made a decision. If they saw me as a joke, fine. But I would write the punchline. And it wouldn't be funny. The following Sunday, I decided to test something. I told myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the kids weren't mocking me as much as I thought. Maybe I was just too sensitive. After all, I was 74. My skin wasn't as thick as it used to be. So I cooked again, this time a pot roast, the same recipe my wife swore by. I set the table, polished the silverware, and even lit a candle. A small touch of dignity, I thought. When everyone arrived, I greeted them warmly, like always. Greg walked in with a six-pack of beer, slapped me on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Dad. I'll help wash down whatever experiment you cooked up this time." His wife, Melanie, laughed so hard she nearly dropped her purse. I chuckled weakly, but inside, my jaw tightened. Linda walked in next, immediately launching into another dad story. "Hey kids," she said to her teens. "Did Grandpa ever tell you how he once got lost using Google Maps on his own street?" The teenagers laughed. "Classic Grandpa," they said in unison. I wanted to say, yes, and classic me is the reason you have a roof over your heads. Classic me is the reason you went to college. Classic me is the reason you get to mock anyone at all. But I stayed silent. Dinner started. The roast was tender, falling apart just like my wife used to make it. I took pride in it, even if I didn't say it out loud. Greg took a bite, chewed, and then smirked. "Not bad, Dad. Did you actually follow the recipe this time? Or just wing it like usual?" Melanie giggled. Maybe he finally figured out YouTube cooking tutorials. Tim, still glued to his phone, muttered without looking up, "Grandpa probably still thinks TikTok is a clock." The table roared again, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't harmless teasing. It wasn't playful family banter. It was systematic humiliation. A game where I was the designated fool, and everyone else got their laugh at my expense. I set my fork down. My hands trembled, not with weakness, but with a kind of fury I hadn't felt in decades. Cleared my throat. "You know," I said softly, "your mother used to hate it when people laughed at me." The table grew quiet for a second, but then Greg shrugged. "Yeah, well, Mom had a soft spot for you." Tim snorted. "Still does, probably." The kids laughed again, and in that moment, something inside me broke. Not in a way that made me want to cry. No, it broke in a way that made me want to act. I realized that every joke, every snicker, every dismissive glance wasn't just disrespect. It was erasure. They were erasing the man I had been, reducing me to a caricature. And the cruelest part? They didn't even see it. To them, I was just the old man. But I wasn't just an old man. I was Harold, a man who'd fought for every inch of respect in his life. A man who'd built a family from nothing. A man who had been underestimated before, and had always found a way to prove them wrong. I sat back in my chair, let them finish their laughter, and smiled. Not because I found it funny, but because I finally understood what needed to be done. I would give them a joke, all right? But the punchline would sting. After everyone left, I went to my study. I hadn't been in there much since my wife passed. Her books were still on the shelves, her knitting basket still tucked by the chair. I sat at my desk and pulled out a notebook. On the first page, I wrote in bold letters, and underneath, "They think I'm the joke, but they've forgotten who taught them everything they know. They've forgotten who held this family together." It's time they remembered. For the first time in years, I felt sharp, clear, alive. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but the seed was planted. If they thought I was irrelevant, I'd show them I was the center of everything. If they thought I was weak, I'd show them strength they couldn't ignore. If they thought I was a joke, I'd make sure they never laughed at me again. And that thought carried me through the night. The next week, when Sunday rolled around again, I did something different. I didn't cook. When they arrived, they found the table empty. Greg raised an eyebrow. "No food, Dad? What, you give up already?" I smiled calmly. "We're eating out tonight. My treat." Linda frowned. "Dad, that's not necessary." "Oh, but it is," I interrupted, my voice firmer than usual. "Because tonight, I'm going to remind you all of something you've forgotten." They exchanged puzzled glances, but followed me anyway. We drove to the nicest steakhouse in town. The kind of place I hadn't been in years. White tablecloths, chandeliers, waiters in suits. The kids were stunned. The grandkids whispered, "Wow, Grandpa picked this?" And as we sat down, I leaned back in my chair, a quiet smile playing on my lips. Because tonight wasn't just dinner. Tonight was the beginning of a lesson they'd never forget. The steakhouse was buzzing that night. Low music, the clink of glasses, and murmurs of people who looked like they had it all figured out. My family, for once, didn't laugh when we walked in. They were too busy staring at the velvet curtains and the gold-trimmed menus. We sat at a large round table near the window. A waiter poured water into crystal glasses, and for a moment, the kids looked nervous. Maybe they thought I'd lost my mind. Greg leaned forward. "Dad, you sure you can afford this? I mean, no offense, but retirement income isn't exactly." I raised a hand. "Greg, don't worry about the bill. Just enjoy the night." He shrugged but said nothing more. The waiter returned, and everyone ordered. Steaks, lobster tails, sides I couldn't even pronounce. They ordered like they hadn't eaten in days. Linda glanced at me and said, "Dad, this is really something. What's the occasion?" I smiled. "You'll see." For most of the meal, I stayed quiet, letting them chatter, letting them fill the silence with stories of their busy lives. Promotions at work, kids' soccer games, vacation plans. Not once did they ask about me. Not once did they wonder how I was doing. Sitting alone in that big empty house week after week. And that was when I knew this wasn't just about the jokes anymore. This was about being invisible. I sipped my water, my eyes steady on them, and in my chest that same fire burned. When dessert came, I finally leaned forward. "You know," I said, my voice calm but cutting, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." Greg raised an eyebrow. "Oh boy, here we go." The others chuckled softly. I ignored them. "I've realized something important. Families, they're like tables, strong when every leg does its part. But when one leg is taken for granted, or mocked, or disrespected, the whole table wobbles." Melanie tilted her head. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I leaned closer. "I'm talking about me. About the way you've all turned me into your entertainment. Your punchline." Silence fell over the table. The waiter walked past, but even he seemed to sense the tension. Greg forced a laugh. "Dad, come on. We're just joking around. Don't take it so seriously." "Seriously?" My voice sharpened. "Greg, when I was working double shifts so you could go to college, was that a joke? When I paid for Linda's wedding, was that a joke? When I bailed Tim out after his gambling mess?" "Yes, Tim, I knew about that. Was that a joke?" Tim's eyes widened, and for once, he put his phone down. I pressed on. "You think because I'm old, because I don't understand your apps and your gadgets, that I've lost my value. But let me tell you something. I am the reason this family has anything. And if I wanted, I could take it all away." Their faces went pale. Greg cleared his throat. "Dad, you don't mean that." I leaned back, smiling faintly. "Don't I?" For the first time in years, they were quiet. No laughter, no snide remarks, just silence. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Respect, or maybe fear. Either way, it was better than being a joke. That night, when I got home, I sat at my desk again. My notebook waited. I wrote, "If they only respect what they fear losing, then that's what I'll show them." See, my kids had forgotten how much they depended on me. Not just for money, but for the very foundation of their lives. I still held the title to the family home. I still had investments they didn't know about. I still had connections in town that could open or close doors for them. They thought I was powerless, but I wasn't powerless. I was patient, and patience, when paired with strategy, is the sharpest weapon an old man can wield. The following week, when they arrived at my house again, the roast was back on the table. Everything looked normal, but inside me, nothing was normal anymore. Dinner started quietly. They seemed cautious, maybe remembering my words at the steakhouse. Then Greg, always the bold one, smirked. "So, Dad, any new adventures with technology this week? Or did you finally master turning the TV on without calling me?" The others chuckled nervously. I didn't smile. Instead, I put my fork down and looked each of them in the eye. "No adventures this week. Just paperwork." Linda frowned. "Paperwork?" "Yes." I let the word hang. "Wills, trusts, titles. You'd be surprised how much a man like me can decide with a pen." Their laughter stopped cold. "Dad?" Greg's voice cracked. "You're not." I leaned forward. "You've made me the joke at this table for too long. But I assure you, when the ink dries, none of you will find it funny." The silence that followed was heavier than any I'd ever known. And for the first time, I saw it in their eyes. Not mockery, not amusement, fear. And that was just the beginning. When you've lived 74 years, you learn one truth. People only value what they can't afford to lose. And my children, bless their selfish little hearts, had no idea how much they could lose. That night after the paperwork comment, I sat in my study until dawn, sketching out a plan. Not for violence, not for cruelty, but for clarity. I didn't want to destroy my family. I wanted to wake them up. They had mistaken kindness for weakness, provision for obligation, my silence for ignorance. It was time to remind them who I was. Step 1, the money. The first step was simple. I visited my lawyer. "Harold," he said, adjusting his glasses, "you're serious about rewriting the will?" I nodded. "Dead serious." He leaned back. "Your children won't like this." I smiled faintly. "That's the point." We drafted a new will that placed the majority of my estate, not in my children's hands, but in a charitable trust. Scholarships for underprivileged kids, community projects, a donation to the local library, the one I used to take my kids to when they were young and impressionable, back when they still thought I was a hero. Of course, I left each child something modest, token, but nothing compared to what they assumed was coming. And just to make sure the message would be loud and clear, I left letters to accompany the will, personal notes explaining why. Step 2, the house. The family home was my pride and joy. I built it with my own 2 hands, brick by brick, back when my wife and I were young. My children assumed it would one day be theirs, split between them. So I called a realtor. By the following week, a discreet for sale sign stood at the edge of the lawn. Linda was the first to notice. She drove up one afternoon, stormed into the house, and demanded, "Dad, what is going on? Why are you selling the house?" I stayed calm. "Because it's mine to sell, and because you all stopped treating it like a home. It's just a free restaurant to you now, a stage for your jokes. I'd rather give it to someone who'll respect it." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I could see the fear creeping in. Good, let it sink. Step 3, the gathering. The real plan, though, wasn't about lawyers or real estate. Those were just tools. The real plan was psychological. I decided to host one final Sunday dinner, but this time not just for my children. I invited extended family, cousins, old friends, people who still remembered me as Harold the Strong, Harold the Provider, Harold the Man. I wanted an audience, because humiliation only stings when it's witnessed. The night of the dinner, I dressed in my best suit, the one I hadn't worn since my wife's funeral. I slicked my hair back, polished my shoes, and stood tall. When Greg walked in, he looked around, puzzled. "Dad, what's with all the people?" I smiled warmly. "A celebration." Linda frowned. "Of what?" "You'll see," I said. The table was set grander than ever. China plates, crystal glasses, a roast that filled the house with the smell of home. For once, I saw a flicker of nostalgia in their eyes. They sat trying to act normal, but I could see their unease. When everyone had arrived, I stood at the head of the table. "Family, friends," I began, my voice steady. "Thank you for being here tonight. I wanted to share something important with all of you." The room quieted. I looked directly at Greg, then Linda, then Tim. For too long, I've been the joke at this table, the old fool, the punchline. But tonight, I want to remind you of something. This family exists because of me. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the double shifts, that was me. And while some of you have forgotten, I haven't. A murmur spread across the table. Some of the cousins nodded, their faces sympathetic. I went on. "I've made decisions recently, decisions about my estate, my house, my legacy. And let me be clear, respect is not optional. If you can't give it freely, you will lose everything you take for granted. Greg's face turned red. Dad, you can't just... I raised a hand. I already have. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the weight of it settling in. For the first time, they realized I wasn't bluffing. This wasn't the doddering old man fumbling with his phone. This was the man who built their lives and could just as easily dismantle them. To drive the lesson home, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letters my lawyer had prepared. I placed one in front of each of my children. Greg stared at his envelope like it was a bomb. Linda's hands trembled as she picked hers up. Tim wouldn't even touch his. You can read them later, I said. But know this, inside those letters is the truth. The truth about how you've treated me. The truth about what it costs to take someone for granted. And the truth about what you stand to lose if you continue down this path. I paused, let the silence stretch. Then I added softer. I loved you enough to give you everything. Now I love you enough to take it back. A gasp rippled through the room. And at that moment, I wasn't the joke anymore. I was the lesson. The room was frozen in silence after I handed out the letters. You could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each second stretching longer than the last. Greg broke first. Dad, this is ridiculous, he snapped, his voice louder than he intended. We were just joking. You're overreacting. Overreacting, I repeated slowly, leaning forward. Greg, you think I don't know the difference between a joke and humiliation? You think I can't feel the sting when my own children treat me like I'm disposable? Melanie tried to interject, her tone dripping with false calm. Harold, no one meant any harm. You know how families are, we tease, we laugh. That's love. I stared at her. No, Melanie. Love protects. Love uplifts. What you call love is laziness. It's easier to laugh at me than to see me. Linda's eyes brimmed with tears. Dad, please, don't do this. Don't take it all away. You don't understand. I cut her off. No, Linda, you don't understand. For years, I've sat here, swallowing the pain, letting you carve your jokes into my dignity. But tonight, you're going to taste what I've been swallowing. Tim, the youngest, scoffed. So what? You're gonna punish us with money? Fine. Keep your stupid will. I don't care. I leaned back and smiled. Good, because you're not getting it anyway. His face went pale. Gasps echoed around the table. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, but I held the floor. You see, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Money was never the point. Respect was. You all forgot that the man you mock is the same man who carried this family through storms you'll never know. When you laughed at me, you weren't just laughing at an old man fumbling with a phone. You were laughing at your foundation, at the hands that fed you, clothed you, sheltered you. I looked at Greg. When your college tuition came due, who paid it? His lips pressed tight. I turned to Linda. When you wanted a fairy tale wedding, who took out a loan to make sure you walked down the aisle like a queen? Tears spilled down her cheeks. Finally, I faced him. And when you gambled yourself into debt, who quietly paid it off so you wouldn't end up in court? Who saved you from shame? His head dropped. I spread my hands across the table. And this is the thanks I get? To be the joke you toss around like scraps at Sunday dinner? No one spoke. Even the grandkids, usually so quick to laugh, were staring at me wide-eyed, seeing me differently for the first time. I stood slowly, the chair creaking as I pushed it back. My voice dropped low, calm but cold. I am done being your joke. From this day forward, the only legacy I leave is a lesson. Respect is not owed. It's earned, and it's mutual. If you can't give it to me while I'm alive, you don't deserve to profit when I'm gone. I raised my glass of water in a mock toast. So here's to the joke who finally wrote the punchline. And with that, I drained the glass. The room was so quiet, I could hear Linda's sobs. Greg's jaw was clenched, his pride battling with the truth he didn't want to admit. Tim muttered under his breath, but he didn't dare say it aloud. My cousins looked at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Respect, maybe even awe. When dessert was served, nobody touched it. The laughter that usually drowned the table was gone. Instead, there was a heavy stillness, like the whole family was holding its breath. Eventually, people excused themselves one by one. Cousins left first, patting my shoulder, whispering words like, "Good for you, Harold," and "About time." My children lingered, as if hoping to repair the night, but I didn't soften. "You should go," I told them firmly. "Dad," Greg started. "Go," I repeated, and for the first time they obeyed without argument. The door shut behind them, and I was alone again. Alone, but not defeated. I walked back to the dining table, now empty except for crumbs and untouched cake. For the first time in years I felt tall, powerful, not because of money, not because of revenge, but because I had reminded them and myself that I was never the joke. I was the lesson. The days after the dinner felt surreal. For years, I'd been used to silence in this house. Silence when I'd enter a room. Silence when I tried to add a word to their endless chatter. Silence when I waited for someone to notice I was still there. But now, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. First, I ignored it, let it buzz on the kitchen counter. I wanted them to sit in the mess they'd created, without me rushing in to mop it up like I always had. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, even at my age. Eventually, I picked up. "Dad?" It was Karen. Her voice trembled the way it hadn't since she was a child. I don't know what came over me that night. I'm sorry. We were wrong. I let the silence hang, just long enough for her to feel the weight of it. Then Mark called. He never apologizes, not even when he rear-ended my Buick years ago. But there he was, fumbling through excuses. "Dad, we were just joking. Like we always do. I didn't realize it hurt you that much." I wanted to snap back, "Of course you didn't realize. You never bothered to look." But instead, I said calmly, "Son, if your joke makes someone else the punchline every single time, it was never a joke. It was cruelty dressed in laughter." He went quiet. Even my daughter-in-law, sweet Lisa, called. She whispered so softly I almost couldn't hear. "Harold, you reminded them who you are. You reminded me, too. You're more than just a chair at the table. You're the reason there's even a table to sit at." Her words nearly undid me. But here's the strange thing. The house is quieter now. Not in the lonely way, but in the peaceful way. The kids, they've stopped coming by as often. I can't tell if it's guilt, or shame, or maybe both. But I don't chase them anymore. I don't beg for visits. I don't sit by the window like a lost dog waiting for the sound of tires in the driveway. I live. I read my books. I take walks. I laugh with neighbors. And when I sit at my table, I don't feel like the joke anymore. You see, I realized something that night. Sometimes revenge isn't about grand gestures. It's about reclaiming your dignity in front of those who stripped it away. It's about showing them that the old man they dismissed still had teeth, still had fire, still had worth. And whether they ever admit it or not, they'll never forget the night I stopped being their joke and became their lesson. Now let me ask you, dear listener, have you ever been laughed at, dismissed, treated like furniture in your own family? What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments below, because maybe you'll teach someone else a lesson too. And if my story struck a chord, don't just sit there quietly. Hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe for more stories that prove one simple truth. You are never too old to stand tall, speak loud, and demand respect. Because sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one they never expected to hear.